I never expected a simple Wi-Fi request to change my perspective on neighborly relationships, but that's exactly what happened last month. Let me take you back to that surprisingly transformative Tuesday afternoon. I've lived in the Oakwood Heights apartment complex for nearly 3 years now, a modest but comfortable building with about 40 units spread across 3 floors. It's the kind of place where you recognize faces in the hallway, but rarely exchange more than a polite nod or cursory hello. I'm in apartment 204, sandwiched between a retired piano teacher who practices Chopin at precisely 7 a.m. every morning and a rotating cast of college students who seem to change every semester. My neighbor across the hall, apartment 205, had always been something of a mystery. I knew his name was Michael. I'd seen it on mis-delivered mail I'd slipped under his door, but our interactions had been limited to those awkward elevator encounters where you both stare at your phones to avoid conversation. From what little I could gather, he seemed to be the quintessential straight guy, always wearing some variation of a sports team cap, coming home with gym bags, and occasionally having loud conversations about fantasy football in the hallway. I'd made assumptions about him. I'll admit that now. I figured we had little in common, and I never made an effort to bridge that gap. That Tuesday started like any other work-from-home day. I was deep into a spreadsheet analysis, my second cup of coffee growing cold beside my keyboard, when a hesitant knock interrupted my concentration. When I opened the door, there stood Michael, looking uncharacteristically uncomfortable. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, laptop tucked under one arm, and asked the question that would unexpectedly reshape our relationship. "Hey man, sorry to bother you, but my internet's completely dead. I've got this important Zoom meeting in 15 minutes. Any chance I could use your Wi-Fi until it's fixed? The company says they can't send someone until tomorrow." Let me explain why this simple request caught me off guard. In apartment living, your home becomes your sanctuary, your private space away from the world. Inviting someone in, especially someone you've mentally categorized as probably wouldn't get me, feels like a vulnerability. But there was something in his expression, a mixture of desperation and genuine apology, that made me hesitate only briefly before saying, "Sure, come on in. I can set you up at the dining table." The relief on his face was immediate and genuine. "You're a lifesaver, seriously. I promise I won't be a bother." As he stepped into my apartment, I became acutely aware of how my space might appear to him. My living room walls featured several abstract paintings in bold colors, a pride flag subtly incorporated into my bookshelf decor, and photos of friends and family at various celebrations. I'd never thought about my apartment as making any particular statement, but suddenly I wondered if it screamed, "Gay bachelor pad," to my straight neighbor. Michael didn't seem to notice or care. He was focused entirely on his laptop, explaining that he worked in project management for a construction firm, and this particular meeting involved clients from across the country. "They're finally approving the budget for the hospital expansion," he explained. "And if I miss this call, my boss will have my head." I scribbled my Wi-Fi password on a post-it note and slid it across the table, watching as he typed it in with focused intensity. "It might take a minute to connect," I told him, remembering how my network sometimes took its time with new devices. "Can I get you some water or coffee while you wait?" The offer was automatic, the kind of hospitality my mother had drilled into me since childhood. Michael looked up, seeming surprised by the gesture, and nodded. "Coffee would be amazing, if it's not too much trouble." I was in such a rush, I didn't even grab my morning cup. As I moved to the kitchen to prepare his coffee, I found myself wondering about the last time I'd had an unexpected guest in my space. Working remotely had gradually reduced my social interactions, and the pandemic years had only accelerated that isolation. There was something almost nostalgic about the simple act of making coffee for someone else, hearing another person's movements in my usually quiet apartment. "How do you take it?" I called from the kitchen. "Black is fine," he replied, then added with a chuckle, "I know, very stereotypical guy thing, right?" That small moment of self-awareness surprised me. Perhaps I'd been too quick to place Michael in a neatly labeled box of assumptions. When I returned with his coffee, he was still waiting for his laptop to connect. "Thanks again for this," he said, gesturing vaguely around the apartment. "I would have gone to a coffee shop, but the nearest one with reliable Wi-Fi is 20 minutes away, and with traffic." He trailed off, taking a sip of coffee. "This is good, by the way. Much better than the instant stuff I make." "French press," I explained. Takes a few extra minutes, but makes all the difference. The conversation could have ended there, lapsing into awkward silence as we waited for his computer to connect. But instead, Michael glanced at my bookshelf and commented, "You're into architecture? I noticed you have several Frank Lloyd Wright books." That observation opened a conversation I never expected to have with the sports cap-wearing neighbor I'd mentally dismissed. Turns out Michael had studied architectural design before switching to project management, and he still harbored a deep appreciation for innovative building concepts. "That's actually why I love my construction job," he explained, animation entering his voice. "I get to see the practical application of design principles, how they translate from paper to reality." For the next 10 minutes, as his laptop finally connected to my network and began updating its software, we discussed everything from mid-century modern aesthetics to the challenges of urban renewal projects. I found myself sharing my own interest in design, which stemmed from a brief period when I'd considered interior design as a career path before settling into my current role in digital marketing. "It's funny," Michael said, checking his computer's progress. "We've lived across from each other for what, 8 months now? And this is the first real conversation we've had." There was no accusation in his tone, just a simple observation that made me reflect on how easily we construct barriers between ourselves and those physically closest to us. "The joys of modern urban living," I replied with a slight smile. "We can be surrounded by people and still completely isolated." Michael nodded thoughtfully at this, then glanced at his screen. 5 more minutes before my meeting. "Mind if I use your bathroom quickly?" I directed him down the hall, using the moment alone to consider how quickly the atmosphere had shifted from awkward intrusion to something approaching comfortable camaraderie. When he returned, Michael settled back at my dining table, adjusting his laptop camera angle. "Do you mind if I stay here for the meeting? It should only be about 45 minutes. I promise I'll use headphones and try not to be disruptive." The request seemed reasonable enough. He was already set up, and I could easily continue my work in the adjacent living room with minimal distraction. "No problem," I assured him. "I've got plenty of space. Just pretend I'm not here." As he prepared for his meeting, putting in earbuds and straightening his casual button-down shirt, I returned to my own workspace, though I found my attention drifting occasionally to this unexpected development in my typically predictable day. There's something strangely intimate about witnessing someone in their professional element, especially when that someone is essentially a stranger. From my peripheral vision, I could see Michael transform from the somewhat awkward neighbor into a confident project manager, speaking articulately about budget considerations and construction timelines. His voice took on a different quality, authoritative but approachable, navigating what sounded like complex negotiations with practiced ease. During a moment when he was primarily listening to others in the meeting, he caught my eye and mouthed a silent "thank you" with a thumbs up. I nodded in acknowledgement, feeling an unexpected sense of satisfaction at having helped facilitate this important professional moment for him. When his meeting finally concluded, Michael removed his earbuds with a deep exhale. "That went better than expected," he said, his relief palpable. "They approved the full budget, which almost never happens on the first round." He began gathering his things, but seemed in no particular hurry to leave. "I really can't thank you enough for this. You basically saved my career today, or at least saved me from a major setback." "Happy to help," I replied, genuinely meaning it. That's what neighbors are for, right? The phrase felt somewhat hollow as I said it, considering we'd barely acknowledged each other's existence until today, but Michael nodded as if it made perfect sense. "Let me make it up to you somehow," he insisted. "Maybe I could grab dinner for us both one night this week. There's this great Thai place that just opened up a few blocks away." The invitation caught me off guard, not because it was unwelcome, but because it represented a crossing of boundaries I hadn't anticipated. We were moving from neighbors of convenience to potentially actual friends. "That sounds great, actually," I found myself saying. "I've been meaning to try that place." We exchanged phone numbers, another small but significant step beyond our previous nodding acquaintance, and he promised to text me about dinner later in the week. As he gathered his laptop and prepared to leave, Michael paused at my bookshelf, examining the framed photos. "Is this your family?" he asked, pointing to a holiday gathering from 2 years prior. The question led to another 15 minutes of conversation as I explained who was who in the photo, including my parents, sister, and her kids. He shared that he was from a smaller family, Just him and his brother since their parents had passed away several years ago. That's partly why I moved to this city, he explained. My brother's here with his wife and kids. I wanted to be close to them, you know? Family's important. There was something refreshingly straightforward about Michael's perspective. No pretense, no carefully constructed persona, just honest reflections on what mattered to him. I found myself responding in kind, sharing more about my own background than I typically would with someone I'd just begun to know. When he finally left, promising to check on his own internet situation and text me about dinner, my apartment felt different somehow. The space was physically unchanged, but the energy had shifted. A boundary had been crossed, not in any uncomfortable way, but in the sense that my home was no longer just my isolated domain. It had become a place where connection could happen unexpectedly. The next day, I received a text from Michael. Internet finally fixed. Tie tomorrow at 7? My treat, seriously. I agreed, and what followed was one of the most unexpectedly enjoyable dinners I'd had in months. Away from the context of our apartments, in the neutral territory of the restaurant, our conversation flowed even more naturally. We discovered shared interests in hiking, though he was far more serious about it than my occasional nature walks, a mutual appreciation for documentary films, and surprisingly similar views on the city's ongoing transportation issues. What struck me most was how quickly my preconceptions about him dissolved. Yes, he was indeed into sports and fitness as I'd assumed, but he was also thoughtful, well-read, and genuinely interested in perspectives different from his own. When I mentioned an ex-boyfriend in passing, there wasn't even a flicker of discomfort, just the normal conversational acknowledgement you'd give any relationship reference. I should probably confess something, Michael said toward the end of our meal. I was kind of intimidated by you before. This admission startled me. I couldn't imagine being intimidating to anyone, let alone someone who appeared so self-assured. You always seemed so put together, he continued, like you had everything figured out. I figured you probably thought I was just some basic bro who wouldn't have anything interesting to say. The irony of our mutual misconceptions made us both laugh. I admitted my own assumptions about him, and we marveled at how easily we create narratives about others based on the most superficial observations. I guess that's why actually talking to people matters, he reflected. You never really know someone until you have a real conversation. In the weeks that followed, our friendship developed in small but meaningful ways. We established a weekly dinner rotation, alternating between trying new restaurants and cooking simple meals in our respective apartments. I discovered that Michael was an unexpectedly good cook, specializing in comfort foods he'd learned from his grandmother. He confessed that cooking had become his pandemic coping mechanism, a way to feel connected to family traditions when actual family gatherings were impossible. During one of these dinner conversations, about a month after the Wi-Fi incident, Michael shared something that stuck with me. You know what I've been thinking about lately? He said, refilling our water glasses. How much we miss by categorizing people too quickly. Like, if my internet hadn't failed that day, we probably would have just kept nodding at each other in the hallway indefinitely. The universe works in mysterious ways, I joked, but his point resonated deeply. How many potential connections do we miss because we decide too quickly who someone is and whether they fit into our lives? How often do we limit our own experiences by surrounding ourselves only with people who reflect aspects of ourselves we already recognize and understand? What began as a simple request for Wi-Fi access had evolved into something I hadn't realized I was missing, a friendship that crossed the boundaries I had unconsciously established in my life. Michael wasn't replacing my existing friend group. He was adding a different perspective, challenging some of my assumptions, and reminding me that community can form in unexpected places. The experience has made me more conscious of other neighbors in our building. The elderly woman who always checks her mail at 3 p.m., the young couple with twin toddlers who look perpetually exhausted, the college student who practices guitar on the stairwell landing when the weather is nice. I've started making small efforts, holding doors longer, offering to help carry groceries, actually learning names instead of assigning mental labels. These small gestures haven't radically transformed our apartment building into some utopian community, but they've created ripples of connection that weren't there before. Last week, when my own internet went down during an important client presentation, I didn't hesitate to knock on Michael's door. He welcomed me in with the same easy hospitality I'd shown him that first day. already moving to clear space on his kitchen table. Full circle, huh? He said with a grin, handing me his Wi-Fi password. Good thing we're friends now. That simple statement, good thing we're friends now, captured everything that had changed since that initial knock on my door. What could have been a one-time transaction of neighborly convenience had instead opened a door to genuine connection. It reminded me that community isn't just about physical proximity. It's about the willingness to see beyond our initial impressions, to make space for others in our lives even when, perhaps especially when they don't fit our preconceived notions of who our kind of people might be. I'm not suggesting that every neighbor interaction will lead to meaningful friendship, or that we're obligated to connect deeply with everyone in our proximity. But I am convinced that there's value in remaining open to possibility, in sometimes saying yes to the unexpected knock at the door. You never know when a simple request for Wi-Fi might lead to a connection that enriches your life in ways you couldn't have anticipated. As I sit here writing this, I can hear Michael's muffled laughter through our shared wall. He's probably watching that comedy series we've both been following. Tomorrow we're planning a hike with his brother's family, and next weekend we're hosting a small gathering for residents of our floor, an idea that would have seemed completely foreign to me just a few months ago. All because an internet connection failed, and in seeking technical connection, we found a human one instead. Total _char_count, 18,473.